Je voudrais donner 3 dates. 2003, janvier 2003, George W. Bush décide de remodeler le Grand Moyen-Orient. Le Grand Moyen-Orient, ça va du Maroc jusqu'au Pakistan. Et il attaque l'Irak, avec les arguments que vous connaissez, dont on sait maintenant qu'ils étaient bidons. Il n'y avait pas d'armes de destruction massive. 2006, 19 décembre 2006, Time Magazine, qui n'est pas un journal pro-russe, à ma connaissance, publie un rapport secret sur la Syrie dans le viseur de Bush. 2006, c'est-à-dire 5 ans avant les printemps arabes. Et il est expliqué comment et pourquoi le gouvernement des États-Unis va soutenir les opposants et renverser le gouvernement d'Assad. Bon, prenons acte d'une ingérence caractérisée avec des moyens, 1 milliard par an de moyens affectés à ça. Et puis, 3e date, 2011, le Grand Moyen-Orient, on continue à le charcuter. Cette fois, c'est la Libye qui tombe, c'est les Français et les Britanniques qui se mettent en première ligne. Et dans cette même période, on commence un nouveau programme sur la Syrie, du côté des États-Unis, pour armer les combattants. Voilà quand même des choses qui doivent être rappelées, parce que c'est pas seulement Poutine qui est dans cette affaire. Poutine, il est arrivé après, bien après, sauf qu'il avait une balle à Tartous depuis les années 70. Voilà, je crois qu'il faut...
Vous nous dites les grands méchants, dans le fond, ce sont les États-Unis.
Je dis que les Américains ont un plan qui a été de remodeler le Grand Moyen-Orient. Je n'ai pas entendu une seule fois ce mot dans les commentateurs depuis des mois sur cette question-là. Et ce projet, c'est un projet de prise du pouvoir et de faire tomber tous les États qui étaient bassistes, indépendants, tortionnaires, on est d'accord, mais avec un chaos beaucoup plus grand depuis qu'on a dégommé Assad, dégommé Kadhafi et qu'on essaye de dégommer Bachar, on a effectivement beaucoup plus de morts et beaucoup plus de réfugiés et beaucoup plus de drames humains. Voilà le résultat. Donc il faut quand même que vous soyez cohérents avec vos postulats de départ. Est-ce que vous soutenez ce projet-là, ce dessin-là, ou est-ce que vous considérez, comme moi je le considère, que toutes les ingérences ont été négatives? Et quand j'ai entendu le président Hollande se vanter dans un livre qui a été écrit par un journaliste français, d'avoir contourné l'embargo de l'Union européenne qui interdisait de livrer des armes, je ne sais pas si c'est vraiment les meilleures choses qu'on ait trouvé à faire pour calmer le conflit. Voilà quelques éléments qu'il faut livrer. Ce n'est pas que les Américains, c'est les Français, c'est les Britanniques.
Je le disais dans...
Puis c'est ce qu'on entend sur le plateau. Oui. Vous êtes d'accord avec ce côté binaire ou c'est plus compliqué que cela?
C'est très compliqué du fait de l'agrégation de tout le monde qui est là, c'est évident, mais en substance, c'est ça. C'est 2 camps qui s'affrontent. Moi, je vais vous dire quelque chose. J'étais il y a 2 ans à peu près, avant que les hostilités commencent en Syrie. Je me trouvais en Angleterre par hasard pour d'autres choses, pas du tout de la Syrie. J'ai rencontré des responsables anglais. Et quelques-uns qui sont mes amis m'ont avoué, en me sollicitant, qu'ils se préparaient quelque chose en Syrie. C'était en Angleterre et pas en Amérique. L'Angleterre préparait l'invasion des rebelles en Syrie. Et on m'a même demandé à moi, sous le prétexte que j'étais ancien ministre des Affaires étrangères, si je participerais comme ça. J'ai évidemment dit le contraire. J'ai dit, écoutez, moi, je suis français, ça ne m'intéresse pas. Mais c'est pour dire que cette opération vient de très loin. Elle a été préparée, conçue, organisée.
Dans quel but Excusez-moi, dans quel but? L'idée de renverser Bachar, c'était quoi le but? La finalité?
Mais dans le but très simple, de destituer le gouvernement syrien, parce que dans la région, il est important de savoir que ce régime syrien a des propos anti-israéliens. Et que par conséquent, tout ce qui bouge dans la région autour, moi j'ai la confidence du Premier ministre israélien qui remonte très longtemps, qui m'avait dit on essaiera de s'entendre avec le Premier ministre, avec les États autour. Et ceux qui ne s'entendront pas, on les abattra. C'est une politique, c'est une conception de l'histoire. Pourquoi pas, après tout? Mais il faut le savoir.
Frédéric Elbert.
Bin Laden is gone. Who is Washington's #1 enemy now?
Washington's enemy is an enemy that doesn't exist. We're fighting an Islamic enemy that Washington believes is out to kill us because we have elections, because we're free, because we have women in the workplace. It's an enemy that doesn't exist. It didn't exist when bin Laden was alive. It doesn't exist now. America is being attacked because of its foreign policy in the Muslim world, because of its support for Israel, because of its support for the Saudi police state, because of its presence on the Arab Peninsula. And until we accept that, until Americans can say to each other, whether you support aid to Israel or not, our relationship with Israel is causing this war, we are not going to be able to defeat this enemy. And Israel itself as a country is not the problem. The real problem is the leaders of the Jewish American community in the United States who influence and corrupt our Congress to support Israel when we have no interest there.
You imply that the Israeli lobby is dragging the United States into the wars, into
Absolutely.
the conflicts?
They're absolutely dragging us in. Iraq was a war that was proffered or was called for mainly.
Then let me ask you this.
Yeah.
The situation in the region, in the wake of all these revolutions in the Middle East and North Africa,
Yes.
you can pretty much describe it as turmoil. Turmoil is no good for Israel. Isn't there a contradiction to what you're saying?
Well, the American political establishment is caught between two things. They're extremely pro-Israel, and they're almost Marxist in their belief that democracy and the spread of democracy is inevitable in all places, in all peoples, at all times. And so they need to protect the Israelis, but they can't say what is a reality. For example, there is not going to be a democracy in Tunisia or Libya or Egypt that in any way resembles democracy in the West. And yet what they've done is create anarchy. They've created a situation where the only beneficiaries are the Islamists. The guns that have flown out of Egypt, out of Tunisia, out of Libya to the Islamists have been enormous in their volume. And the prisons that were opened in Egypt, Tunisia, and Libya have reinforced the Islamist groups across the world. So their mindless pursuit of secular democracy, at the end of the day, endangers the stability of the region and probably the whole world.
Are you saying we're going to see further radicalization of the region?
Oh, especially in Africa. Yes, ma'am. The guns that are flowing out of the three places where there were Arab Spring revolts are going to cause problems in Somalia, across North Africa, and in Nigeria.
Let's talk about Syria.
Yes.
Syria says the earth will start shaking if anyone intervenes in their internal affairs. How badly does the U.S. Is the U.S. trying to interfere?
Oh, I think we're interfering unconscionably. Until they removed the U.S. ambassador, he was running around the country trying to encourage groups to overthrow the Syrian government. That is not the role of any diplomat, United States or Russian or Chinese or British. We have really very cold-bloodedly urged Syrians to get out on the street knowing that they're going to get shot down by their government. Again, Syria is a country where there is no U.S. interest. Since I was a little boy, we've been afraid of the Syrians, and if you look at the map, it's hard to imagine that little blot of country called Syria could be a threat to the United States.
The CIA has reportedly worked with the Syrian opposition for years.
Well, I'm not sure we worked with the Syrian opposition. We've certainly worked with the Syrian
WikiLeaks
government.
cables.
Well, I haven't. Yeah. Well, then, if it's there, it's there. But our relationship with the Syrians is really a relatively unimportant one. But again, it's another very good example of the dichotomy in the thinking of American leaders. Because as we call for democracy in Syria, if Assad goes, Israel's security goes straight down.
If the region becomes a complete mess, doesn't Washington see any dangers to Israel? I mean, with Iran involved, it won't be pretty.
I think that's exactly right, ma'am. I don't know what the thinking is, except that they have come down on the belief that democracy is better for everybody. And the truth is, American and Western foreign policy interests in the Middle East have depended for 50 years on the maintenance of tyranny. Tyranny that gave us access to oil, tyranny that protected Israel, and in the last 20 years, tyrannies that persecuted Islamists to protect us. All of that is going by the wayside. And to the Israelis' credit, the Israelis are the only ones who have stood up and said, democracy may not be very good for our security, and they couldn't be more correct.
About Iran, what's Washington's plan for Iran?
Whatever Israel's plan is for Iran. Both parties, Republicans and Democrats, are deathly afraid that the Israelis will attack them off their own hook. And if Israel attacks Iran, the Americans will get blamed for condoning it, whether we did or not. So I think what we're seeing is a slow, almost inexorable advance toward some kind of a conflict with Iran.
What do you make of these recent accusations that the Iranian government was trying to kill the Saudi ambassador in Washington?
I'm not in a position to know whether or not the information was accurate. But when I was a young intelligence officer, I worked against Iran and Lebanese Hezbollah. And I can tell you, in the 90s, they were meticulous in covering their tracks and only using as agents of terrorism their own people. The plot that was described by the Attorney General of the United States is a comic opera.
Through a Mexican drug cartel.
Yeah, and to believe that the Iranians would risk war with the United States, Israel, and much of NATO to kill a Saudi ambassador who was not even part of the royal family, that's hard for me to believe.
Let's talk about Libya. Libya is in ruins in the wake of NATO bombings. Yes. It's brimming with weapons.
Yes.
An al-Qaeda flag was planted over a courthouse in Benghazi.
Yes. How
good of a playground is Libya for people with radical agendas?
Very strong Islamist presence in Libya. Since the war against the Soviets in Afghanistan, Libya has sent as many of its people to fight in those insurgencies, the Islamist insurgencies, as any other country in North Africa, maybe outside of Saudi Arabia. The Libyan Islamic Fighting Group fought a long time against the Soviets. They fought against Gaddafi. A great number of Libyans went to Iraq and to Afghanistan to fight us. And whatever strength the Libyan resistance had in terms of military capability, that came from experienced Islamist fighters. So the idea that somehow there's democracy afoot in Libya is just simply wrong.
Could it become a hotbed of terror?
I don't know if it could become a hotbed of terror, but it can become a country that's decidedly anti-American, anti-NATO. It can be probably less a hotbed of terror than a country that is vastly unstable.
It seems the U.S. is almost creating grounds for terrorists to surge and then goes out fighting them. We see it in Pakistan. They got the whole nation alienated because of the strikes. A lot of people want revenge. How efficient is that?
We are very efficient in this day and age, in the last 20 years, in creating enemies. We're not very efficient in creating security for the United States. We have the best educated population in the world, and we have the people with the littlest amount of common sense. How many times have we heard Mr. Clinton, Mr. Bush, Mr. Obama say, this has nothing to do with religion, this is not a religious war, this is a bunch of people who are just madmen. We are definitely fighting a religious war. And until we come to realize that, we are never going to be able to defeat it. In fact, we're encouraging the growth of a new generation of people who are going to fight us.
The U.S. is pulling its troops out of Iraq, but at the same time, it's boosting its military presence in the Persian Gulf. More ground troops are planned to be deployed. New drone bases are being built. What do you make of such expansion?
It just demonstrates again the ignorance of the United States government in terms of its political leadership about what our problem is in the Muslim world. The key point of formation for al-Qaeda was the presence of U.S. military forces on the Arabian Peninsula. 15 years after they declared war on us, we're now going to take people out of Iraq and put them in Kuwait and Bahrain and Saudi Arabia, reinforcing our presence on the Arab Peninsula. Only going to cause us more foes and more enemies in the Islamic world. It's a contradiction. It's a lack of common sense.
Let me ask you this: if the U.S. pulls out of everywhere,
yes,
is it going to be the end of terrorism?
It certainly would deny the terrorists the glue of unity that keeps them focused on the United States. If we weren't the main enemy, they would be attacking Israel, they would be attacking the Saudis, they would be attacking the Moroccans. The war would be
And would you say let them attack the Israelis and the Saudis?
Let them go. Sometimes they say the Chinese will come in. I said, let the Chinese deal with these people for the next 50 years. We've had enough of it. But I think the point is the Americans can't get out. We're dependent on the Saudis to maintain our interests in the world oil market. And the Saudis buy, next to the Chinese, more of our debt than anyone else. So as long as we're side by side with the Saudis and with the Israelis, we're stuck in the Middle East, and America will continue to bleed.
What happened at 9/11 is we didn't have a strategy, we didn't have bipartisan agreement, we didn't have American understanding of it, and we had instead a policy coup in this country. A coup. A policy coup. Some hard-nosed people took over the direction of American policy, and they never bothered to inform the rest of us. I went through the Pentagon 10 days after 9/11. I couldn't stay away from Mother Army. I went back there to see Don Rumsfeld. I'd worked for him as a White House fellow in the 1970s. All this is in the book. And I said, am I doing okay on CNN? He said, yeah, fine. He said, I'm thinking about it. He says, I read your book, and he said, this is a book that talks about the Kosovo campaign. And he said, I just want to tell you, he said, nobody's going to tell us where or when we can bomb. Nobody. He said, I'm thinking of calling this a floating coalition. What do you think about that? I said, well, sir, thanks for reading my book. And, he said, thanks, that's all the time I've got. Really. And I went downstairs. I was leaving the Pentagon, and an officer from the Joint Staff called me into his office and said, I want you to know, he said, sir, we're going to attack Iraq. And I said, why? He said, we don't know. He said, I said, well, did they tie Saddam to 9/11? He said, no. He said, but I guess they don't know what to do about terrorism, and so they think, but they can attack states, and they want to look strong, and so I guess they think if they take down a state, it will intimidate the terrorists. And you know, it's like that old saying, he said, if the only tool you have is a hammer, then every problem has to be a nail. Well, I walked out of there pretty upset. And then we attacked Afghanistan. I was pretty happy about that. We should have. And then I came back to the Pentagon about 6 weeks later. I saw the same officer. I said, why haven't we attacked Iraq? We still going to attack Iraq? He said, oh, sir. He says, it's worse than that. He said, he pulled up a piece of paper off his desk. He said, I just got this memo from the Secretary of Defense's office. It says we're going to attack and destroy the governments in 7 countries in 5 years. We're going to start with Iraq, and then we're going to move to Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and Iran. I said, 7 countries in 5 years. I said, is that a classified memo? He said, yes, sir. I said, well, don't show it to me. He was about to show it to me. He said, because I want to talk about it. And I sat on this information for a long time, for about 6 or 8 months. I was so stunned by this, I couldn't begin to talk about it. And I couldn't believe it would really be true, but that's actually what happened. These people took control of the policy in the United States. And I realized then, it came back to me, a 1991 meeting I had with Paul Wolfowitz. You know, in 2001 he was Deputy Secretary of Defense, but in 1991 he was the Undersecretary of Defense for Policy. It's the number 3 position in the Pentagon. And I had gone to see him when I was a 1-star general. I was commanding the National Training Center. I had met him one time. He said, if you ever get to Washington, come look me up. They always say that. Well, I was there in Washington. It was a Friday afternoon. I'd visited Colin Powell. He'd given me 5 minutes of his precious time and sent me on my way, and I was bored in the Pentagon, and I thought, I'll just go, who can I see? I think I'll see Wolfowitz. So I called, and up there he was available. Scooter Libby came to the door. I met Scooter for the first time, and he brought me in, and I said to Paul, I said, and this is 1991, I said, Mr. Secretary, you must be pretty happy with the performance of the troops in Desert Storm. And he said, well, yeah, he said, but not really. He said, because the truth is we should have gotten rid of Saddam Hussein, and we didn't. And this was just after the Shia uprising in March of 91, which we had provoked, and then we kept our troops on the sidelines and didn't intervene. And he said, but one thing we did learn, he said, we learned that we can use our military in the region, in the Middle East, and the Soviets won't stop us. He said, and we've got about 5 or 10 years to clean up those old Soviet client regimes. Syria, Iran, Iraq, before the next great superpower comes on to challenge us. And it was like, you know, I'm coming out of the Mojave Desert. I've been training troops. I haven't been thinking geostrategy for some time. And suddenly a guy just sort of shoves this nugget at you. Well, you remember it. It was a pretty stunning thing. You mean the purpose of the military is to start wars and change governments? It's not to sort of deter conflict? We're going to invade countries? And, you know, my mind was spinning. And I put that aside. It was like a nugget that you hold on to. This country was taken over by a group of people with a policy coup. Wolfowitz and Cheney and Rumsfeld, and you could name a half dozen other collaborators from the Project for a New American Century. They wanted us to destabilize the Middle East, turn it upside down, make it under our control. It went back to those comments in 1991. Now, did anybody ever tell you that? Was there a national dialogue on this? Did senators and congressmen stand up and denounce this plan? Was there a full-fledged American debate on it? Absolutely not. And there still isn't. And that's why we're failing in Iraq. Because Iran and Syria know about the plan. All you have to do is read the Weekly Standard and listen to Bill Kristol, and he blabbermouths it all over the world. Richard Pearl the same way. They could hardly wait to finish Iraq so they could move into Syria. It was like a laydown. Oh, our legions are going to go in there. This wasn't what the American people voted George Bush into office. Well, they didn't actually vote him into office, but it wasn't what many of the people who... It wasn't what he campaigned on. He campaigned on a humble foreign policy, the most arrogant foreign policy in American history. He campaigned on no peacekeeping, no nation building, and here he is with Afghanistan and Iraq. It's astonishing. So the root of the problem is not how many troops are in Iraq. Please believe me. Don't be mad, if you're a Democrat, at your Democratic congressman because they can't reduce the troops and frustrate the president. That's not the issue. And if you're a Republican, don't be mad at the Democrats because they're fussing with the troops. Whether you're a Democrat or a Republican, if you're an American, you ought to be concerned about the strategy of the United States in this region. What is our aim? What is our purpose? Why are we there? Why are Americans dying in this region?
I remember after 9/11 when my CIA handler, Richard Fuse, told me that there really wasn't going to be much of a 9/11 investigation. And we were going to try to keep the people calm. That's what he said. We're going to keep them calm. And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, we don't really need them to know everything that we were doing before 9/11. And I said, well, why? What do you think what do you think's going to happen when they find out that you didn't tell them the truth? Why don't you just tell them the truth right now? And he said, well, that's not really what they want to do. So I had, I had different ideas. I will tell you straight off the bat that right after 9/11, my CIA handler received a $13 million payoff from the 9/11 investigation that was supposed to be money used for the Iraqi, to secure Iraq's cooperation. And I ended up getting indicted on the Patriot Act. I was the second non-Arab American ever indicted on the Patriot Act after Jose Padilla. And my crime was in opposing terrorism and going to Congress, and I had spoken to the staff of Senator John McCain and Senator Trent Lott, and I had pounded them. I called their chiefs of staff, their legislative directors, and their foreign policy people, and I said, I'm an asset who covered Iraq and Libya at the United Nations, and I have a story to tell, and you need to hear what I have to say. And within 30 days, I am not making this up, this is actually, thanks to the Patriot Act, all of my phone calls to these offices are taped by the FBI, so I can actually prove that they occurred. And I have the dates, I have the actual phone conversations on tape. And within 30 days of those conversations, I woke up to hear the FBI pounding at my door, and I got up out of bed and I looked out the window, and there are men in flak jackets in my porch. And I open the door, and they come into my house, and they're like, Ms. Susan, and the FBI agent is shaking. He's shaking. And he said, you are Susan Lindauer, you are hereby notified, you are under arrest on the Patriot Act. And I said, what? You have the right to remain silent, anything you say, etc., etc. He read me my Miranda rights, and I was just like, what are you talking about? I'm making coffee. You know, I'm not a bank robber, I'm not a drug dealer, I'm not a murderer. I haven't broken any laws that I can think of. And I have no idea what you say that I've done. He said, well, your attorney will explain it to you later on. Okay? Okay. That began a 5-year indictment, 5-year nightmare on the Patriot Act. I was never taken to trial. In 5 years, I was allowed 1 morning of testimony with 2 witnesses. The 2 witnesses were a former chief of staff for a congressional member of Congress, and my old friend Park Godfrey, who verified the 9/11 warnings that I'm going to talk about tonight. And I'm going to tell you, and then I'm going to let you guys ask a lot of questions, and I know you're going to have a lot of questions. I'm going to do my best to answer as honestly as I can. I do not have all the answers, but I will tell you up front that I believe there was both the hijackings, and that does not mean that I'm right and you're wrong. I believe there were both hijackings and a controlled demolition scenario, and I'll explain to you how the whole thing fits together. And you may disagree, and that's okay if you disagree with me. But I can tell you, but when you hear what I have to say, you'll understand why I've reached this conclusion. So I believe both of them happened, okay? And it's also very important for you to know that as the 10-year anniversary of 9/11 comes up, no offense, but you guys have no idea what actually happened. This is like the lies are so much bigger than what you know. And it's so much deeper, and it's so much more tragic once you have the truth. So on that note, let me just take you to, I'm actually going to start, I'm going to move you a little bit ahead to remember when George Bush they were counting the votes in Florida. Okay? I'm going to take you back to November of 2000. They had not yet declared that George Bush had won the election. I was having meetings with the full knowledge and permission of the CIA with Iraq's ambassador to the United Nations on resuming the weapons inspections. It is very important for you to understand that this story with 9/11 also ties in deeply to what happened with Iraq. And contrary to everything you were told, the Iraqis were not resistant to weapons inspections. They had a comprehensive agenda. The CIA had already a comprehensive agenda for resolving the entire conflict without war at all. And it involved weapons inspections, cooperation with anti-terrorism, and major financial contracts for U.S. corporations, and oil. And this would be developed over a period of time. But we already had, by November of 2000, we already had an agreement with the Iraqi government. We had a framework agreement that was, at that point, it was undefined, not so well defined, and we had to make it defined. But they had already consented to all of these things. They wanted peace with us. And so by February of 2001, the Iraqis had agreed to invite the FBI to send a task force into Baghdad with authorization to conduct terrorism investigations and to make arrests of terror suspects. This is very important for you to understand. So this is like the background of what you have to know. Okay, in April of 2001, I was summoned to this is already happening. The Comprehensive Peace Framework, those discussions are already underway. And I am, at this point, the chief asset covering the Iraqi embassy and the Libya house, both of them, I do both of them, and Yemen and Syria and Egypt and Malaysia. But Iraq and Libya are my primary countries. And so I'm a back channel, which means that the U.S. government gives me messages to give the Iraqis, and then the Iraqis give me messages to give to Washington. So I know everything. Every single conversation is going through me. And I can tell you that in April of 2001, I was summoned to my CIA handler, Dr. Richard Fuse, and he said he had a message for me to deliver to New York at the earliest possible convenience. And the message was this: we are looking for information on a conspiracy to hijack airplanes. We expect the target to be the World Trade Center. We think they're going to fly the airplanes into the World Trade Center. And we want the Iraqis to provide any, it's called actionable intelligence. Actionable intelligence is a name, an airport hub, a flight number, something that's going to help us identify who they are, where they're meeting, what their nationalities are, anything like this. And he says, he gives me a message, and he says, we want this information, and I want you to tell the Iraqis that if they fail to give us this information, and if it is later determined that they knew the information and they did not give it to us, then the United States is prepared to go to war with Iraq. Okay, this is April of 2001. Well, I went up to New York, and I was we were in the middle of these great negotiations. We already had an invitation, from February of 2001, we had an invitation for the FBI to come to Baghdad. So I go up to New York, I'm very pleasant. I'm very polite. There's no reason to be nasty with these people, they want peace. I say, hey, could you please send a message to Baghdad? We'd like this information. If you come across anything, you know, Saddam had been one of our best sources on terrorism throughout the 1990s. Iraq hated terrorism because they believed that they hated Islamic jihadis. He did. Whether you like Saddam or not, whether you hate Saddam or not, he hated Islamic conservatives. He was convinced that they would take advantage of the crumbling of authority in Baghdad under the sanctions, and that they would then try to overturn his government, and the poverty of the people from the sanctions would fuel this problem, would help overturn his government. So he wanted to help us at every turn keep these people from becoming too powerful. Okay, and so we knew this. So when I go to New York in April of 2001, I'm very friendly, and I say, hey, look, could you send the message to Baghdad? Let them know we're looking for this. Thanks. And the message from the Iraqis in April of 2001 is, hey, send the FBI. We've already agreed to send we've already invited you to send the FBI. Come on. Tell them, just bring them on. Sure. Wow, you didn't know that, did you? Okay, so I go back to Washington, and I get a phone call from Richard. He said, come down to my office. I want to hear what they said. I go down, I said, oh, I was real polite. Yeah, I gave him a message, sure. He said, I didn't tell you to be nice. I told you to tell those, this is going to be on television, right? This is going to be like, okay, well, I'll soft pedal what he said. He was like, you go back to, you stupid goddamn blankety. I told you to tell those SOB MFers, God, GD, blah, 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 screaming, circling me around his conference. I'll never forget it. Circling his conference desk, ranting and raving, waving his arms around. He didn't do that very often. He does not have that kind of personality. He's a very calm man, and he feels that if you're really angry at somebody, then the more calm you are, the more dangerous you are. That's CIA. He's old school CIA. Okay, so he's screaming now. And I go back, he's like, you go back to New York and you deliver the message exactly the way that I told you to deliver the message. And I said, well, Richard, I don't want them to think I'm threatening them because, I believe in negotiations and conflict resolution. He said, no, I don't want them to think you are threatening them. And he said, I don't want them to think I am threatening them. I want you to tell them this threat of war originates at the highest level of government, above the CIA director, and above the Secretary of State. That it would be 3 men, President George Bush, Vice President Dick Cheney, and Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld, and no one else. Those are the 3 people who are threatening war. And I want to be really clear about the message that I was ordered to give them. We demand that you turn over any actionable, any fragment of intelligence outlining a conspiracy involving airplane hijackings and a strike on the World Trade Center. If you withhold this information, if we discover that you have withheld this information and the attack occurs, then we will bomb you back to the Stone Age. You will be bombed harder than you've ever been bombed before. You will be destroyed. You've never been hit the way we're going to hit you now. Okay, so I went up and I delivered that message. This is May of 2001. In June and July, practically every single week, my CIA handler, Dr. Richard Fuse, and I talked about 9/11. And it was very clear that the intelligence community was being prepped for two things. One, to expect airplane hijackings. Now, I have to be honest with you, because I know a lot of you are interested in the controlled demolition. They prepped us to expect the airplane hijackings. They told us about it. Like my CIA handler demanded that Iraq had to give us this, and they insisted that if it happened, there would be dire consequences. Now, what you're going to see in my book, and we have more copies of my book outside. We've got more here too. There was something else going on that summer that was really beautiful. This peace framework that we had been working on was magnificent. It was turning out just glorious for a peace dividend. The Iraqis were now offering the weapons inspections, which of course the United States had very rigorous standards for the weapons inspections. Iraq was offering cooperation with anti-terrorism to allow the FBI to go in. And Iraq started to offer a lot more. A lot more came on the table. By June and July of 2001, Iraq was offering the United States preferential contracts. Now think about the economy today. Preferential contracts for the United States corporations on telecommunications, healthcare, hospital equipment, pharmaceuticals, transportation. Iraq offered to buy 1 million American manufactured automobiles every year for 10 years. Think of what that would have done to the economy. Think about non-dual use factory production. And all of this was because the CIA was like, you know, if we're going to give up these darn sanctions, we're going to take a pound of flesh with it. They had no, and whether you like the CIA or not, and most of you, 99% of you don't like the CIA, I realize that, of course. But the CIA was doing what it's supposed to do, whether you like it or not. They were taking care of what is in the best interest of the United States government, with the best interest of the United States economy, and they were not going to let Iraq punish the United States. And I hated the sanctions. I was doing this because I hated the sanctions. I was doing it because I thought they had destroyed education, they wiped out literacy in a single generation, they destroyed the hospitals and the healthcare system. Iraq performed the second heart transplant in the world, and we wiped them out. Okay? 11,000 people died every month. By the end of 1996, 500,000 children had died of sanctions, and they only counted 5-year-olds and younger. They didn't even count the 6-year-olds because the United Nations was holding back the numbers. And after that report in December of 96, they stopped counting it. The United Nations never published another report on the deaths. So frequently what you will hear is that only 500,000 children died, but in fact they continued to die, and approximately 1 million children died. They were babies. They weren't even alive when the first Gulf War happened. This was an offense against, this is genocide. This is a mass genocide. So that's my motivation. But the CIA did not have my motivation. They were out to make sure that the United States was not going to be punished for what they had done. And I was like, and believe me, by this point, we just wanted to get rid of the sanctions. The Iraqis were like, if they'll get rid of the sanctions, you bet. We'll give them anything they want. So before 9/11, you could have had every single thing you possibly could dream of. And if the CIA could have thought of more to ask for, we would have. We would have asked for, it was shameless. Okay, so you have peace that's breaking out in the Middle East. You have the 9/11 warnings. And then in August of 2001, we went into high mode, high activity mode. I can tell you the exact day, on August 2nd, and after I tell you this, I'll open it up to questions. On August 2nd was the Senate nomination hearings for Robert Mueller to head the FBI. He was going to be the FBI director. And I was on the phone with my CIA handler, Richard Fuse, and I said, there's not one single terrorism investigation this man hasn't thrown. Oops. That's okay. He threw the Oklahoma City bombing investigation. He threw Lockerbie. And I said, this man should not be the FBI director when this next attack occurs. And Richard Fuse said to me, my God, what if there is no FBI director when this happens? I said, do you think it's that soon? Do you think the attack is imminent? He said, oh yeah. He said, it's absolutely just in the next couple of weeks. He said, I don't want, and I said, well, God, Richard, I'll go back to New York right now, and I'll pump the Iraqis and see if they've got anything from Baghdad. I'll see if they have any news for us. And he said, oh my God, Susan, do not go back to New York City. It's too dangerous. We are expecting the use of a miniature thermonuclear device. And they were not afraid that I was going to be hurt by like falling debris in the World Trade Center. I wasn't going to be at the World Trade Center. They were afraid of radiation contamination, like the winds blowing the radioactive stuff. And that's what he was like, don't go up there. We're expecting mass casualties. And I said, well, Richard, I'll go up the day after. This was I can tell you the exact day. It was a Thursday. And I said, I will go up to New York on Saturday and I'll report to you on Monday. And we'll just find out if the Iraqis have anything to give us. I went up to New York. The Iraqis said, ain't got nothing. We don't know. We don't know anything about this. You keep telling us about this. The only way we know about it is because you're talking about it. But we don't have any information to give you. And if we did, we understand the consequences. We know that if we don't help you, you're going to go to war with us if you think we did. And if there was anything we could give you, we would do it. So I go back and I report that on August 6th. On August 6th, there is a memo to the president telling him that this is a high security threat, that it is an emergency level, that it's imminent.